Well, welcome everyone to our first afternoon session of the second day of Rare Fair. And we are honored today to have Pam Cusick from Rare Patient Voice with us. And she is going to share some things about Rare Patient Voice. But the title of our session is Patients as Opinion Leaders, Partners in Education. And, Pam, it's so critical as rare disease parents, rare disease caregivers, and advocates that we stay educated. We in the past, I know, when I was younger, we just relied upon our doctors to know everything, but they're just one person or just a couple of people, and they have thousands of things that they have to do. And our doctors are humble enough that when we come in with stuff from Cambria, they actually listen to what we have found out. They may rule it out, but they actually do listen to us. So it is kind of refreshing. So with that, Pam, I would like for you to share a little bit about yourself. Please tell us about Rare Patient Voice, and then let's hit on this topic of patients as opinion leaders. So welcome to the Rare Fair.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here, Jeff. So I'm Pam Cusick, and I am the Senior Vice President at Rare Patient Voice. And our goal is to connect patients with opportunities to share their voices. And by sharing their voices, I mean connecting with organizations that are creating products and services that can help them. We have all kinds of projects that we connect patients with, everything from market research projects where they're completing a survey or participating in an interview, or all the way to things where like doing video vignettes where a client might want to really hear what a patient has to say about their condition so they can share that with their team, and the team gets a good sense of who these patients are that they're trying to develop products for. um, we have over 100,000 patients and caregivers now who we have connected with, that they're interested in participating in these types of opportunities. But as our name, states, we started with in the rare space, and we have found, the rare parents, rare patients are very interested in sharing, and they're the experts in their condition. They know more. As you were mentioning with your doctor knows a lot, but you are the patient who lives with this every day, who knows kind of the cycle of your symptoms and what's happening on a not just day-to-day basis, but even an hour-to-hour basis. So we like to try to find as many opportunities, and that's really my role, finding as many opportunities as we can for patients to be able to share their experiences and educate the community, educate pharma, educate device makers, educate those creating programs, public health programs, all kinds of things that touch patients, so that they can hear the patient's voice and they can understand what the patient is experiencing, so they can better create products, services, materials, and programs that are useful to patients.
Sorry, I had myself muted there. With this. One of the things that I hear, if I hear a doctor venting about something, it's the WebMD diagnosis or the coming in. So one of the things that has popped up regularly with it is that how do we help patients vet or validate the information as being creditable? And I'll give you an example. There was a friend of ours, and it didn't have to do with rare disease, but they had a form of cancer, and they had read somewhere on the internet that if you drank so much peroxide in a day, it would help with the cancer. And so happened that their son was like a medical professional, and he was like, if you drink that much peroxide, you're going to be really, really sick. It, you know, but that stuff is out there and it's being posted. So, what advice can we give to the patients? Like when you give and saying, "Hey, this is a credible source." How do they do that? And I know Eden and I have went through doctorate programs. We understand how to look at information, but if you got somebody that's just out there, they may not.
Right. Yeah, it's a tough thing, especially in the era of your Dr. Google. where I mean I do the same thing. I'll Google symptoms and and be looking for things and you know what we try I try to do is look for verified sources. So medical journals. And again, not everybody, as you're saying, not everyone's going to look for those things, but there are many, very well respected peer reviewed journals that I would trust information there. I don't generally trust a blog post that is, sharing information about a particular condition. I'll want to see if it's something that's, in JAMA or Lancet or something that, is a reputable source that's been peer reviewed. There are sources, other sources. So your teaching hospitals, Johns Hopkins, the Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, all of those sources, they go through a lot to make sure that they're providing accurate information to their patients. So I would say, it's really a matter of doing your due diligence, looking at what the resource is or what the source is of that information, and then maybe doing a little bit of a double check on where that information came from. And then it obviously, you want to listen to your doctor and make sure that if someone tells you to drink peroxide, you might want to double check and make sure that that's not the best thing to do. But it's important because we do see a lot out there. And the other thing is, there are people that through different support groups and advocacy groups that you work with, and those people share great information with you and can share new things that you might not have heard of before. The best thing to do there is to again verify the source, make sure that you have something that you can double check it against before you take any kind of action.
Yeah, and I have to agree. Our experience with the social media realms are sometimes very, very frustrating.
Mhm.
Um, you know, and you do see patients a lot of times, especially when it comes to their kids, that they are looking for an answer, and the path to diagnosis, it can be anywhere as short as 3 years, as much as 7 or 8 years, depending on the rare condition. And we're trying to shorten that. We're trying to walk into it, and you become very familiar with hospitals and clinics and your way around um, with it. But yeah, I think having those sources and being able to validate them is important. And I like what you said about the social media content. And I also want to say that the social media piece can be very guarded about the social media. We actually had a panel yesterday on oversharing
Mhm.
in your social media. How do you protect your child, and what's good information and with it. And it's kind of you know uh, I always look at social media as kind of hearsay, if you will. Now, sometimes you can get good information uh, about that.
For
You can get, hey, here's a link to a doctor, but we just read one just a few minutes ago that a mom is looking for help. Just anybody said, we're back to the doctor again, and we still don't have a diagnosis.
sure.
And we hear that a lot in the rare patient community. You mentioned that you help check connect with technologies and that type of thing with it, and we're looking all the time for advancements in technology. Can something help? All of us have our mobile phone in our hand, with it. Can you speak to any of those apps that you are familiar with? Has Rare Patient Voice had any apps that have come up that might be beneficial to the rare disease community?
So when we do a particular study, we're not always we're like a matchmaker. So we're connecting the patient with that opportunity, and we're not always um, deep into what the app is or what that resource is. I know that there are a lot of things out there, and there are a lot of things being developed. User experience is a term in the research world. So user experience, consumer experience, where a lot of websites, apps, and other devices are being tested with patients to make sure that they actually provide the information that a patient needs, that it actually works the right way so that the patient, if the patient is putting in, let's say it's a symptom tracker or something like that, that they can actually use it and it's giving them valuable information. So I can't necessarily speak to specific apps that are out there, but I can say, just from a research standpoint, I know that there's a lot going on because we see a big uptick in patients or in clients who are coming to us with these projects that they need patients' input to test a particular app, or it might be where it's, like I said, a symptom tracker or something like that, and then it alerts them to something, if something looks different over time, and those things will be very useful, and I think that there are more and more of them coming out.
Well, yeah, and I agree. So, if you go out and you do a search for apps, there's all kinds of them, and I gotta be honest, I haven't found a great one that fits our little one's profile, for what she's doing, but maybe help tracking some of the stuff with it. Uh, One of the things that we have noticed, and in looking around with it, is, and rightfully so, patients have become very concerned about their privacy, about where's my information going. Um, why should I participate in the study? How is my data going to be used? Do I get to, am I compensated for it? So many of the registries are like, well, just volunteer your data. And that's great for the registry, but maybe not as great for the patient in the short term, maybe in the long term with this. But how do you address it? Because that's probably a question that you guys get when you're doing that matchmaking piece
Mhm.
of it is, "Well, what about my privacy? I am a private person. I don't want my information just put on a mailing list and scattered abroad." So, from a rare patient voice perspective, what do you tell patients and caregivers that come in?
Sure. So we're very, very cautious about privacy, and we comply with all the laws and regulations that are out there that guide patient privacy. But on a more granular level, when a project comes in and we're connecting a patient to that, we send out an invitation if they're interested in participating. They let us know if they're interested, and then if it's a study where information. So, for example, if it's an interview or a focus group where their personal information would be shared, they have to, give us consent to share that with the focus group moderator or the interviewer, and then the client on the other side also has to provide we call it a PII form, but it's a confirmation that they will not disclose this information. They will hold everything confidential. They will not share it.
Mhm.
Um, you know, other than saying, a patient, not using someone's name. So we have pretty strict, things in place with our clients as far as our, when people sign up with us, we ask them just to provide a basic amount of information. So, are you a patient or caregiver, your condition, where you are, very, probably a handful of, maybe 10 or 12 things. And then once a study comes up, that's where they would provide that, maybe more detailed information about their condition. And that's only after they have consented with that particular project. So it's probably a little bit of extra work, but we feel like it's important to make sure that each time a patient participates, that they are consenting and saying, yes, I agree to share this with this particular client. I think it's very important to be careful about that because there are lots of, there's a lot of fine print in the world, right? So,
Mhm.
when I sign up for ancestry.com and I click, all the buttons because I just want to know where my family came from, all of my information gets shared
That's
with a
right.
lot of other people because I clicked all those boxes. That happens on some social media sites that, where they call it passive listening. So
Mhm.
where somebody gets the right to listen in on a particular website's what the people are saying on that social media site, um, and that I don't I'm not 100% sure that people actually know that's happening on a regular basis. And I think that, if people were aware, and this goes to your oversharing talk yesterday, they might not share as openly on some of the sites that they do. and people are using that information and getting compensated for it on, in many cases. For us, we do pay patients for their time. So they earn $100 an hour for participating in a study, which we think is more than reasonable for, given that a lot of, as you're saying, a lot of patients are donating their information or donating their time. And we
Mhm.
feel like, as I said before, patients are the experts, and you're not, we're, the information is being used to make big decisions about them or about their family members. And so we want to make sure that they're compensated well. And we've paid patients over $8 million since we started in 2013, which is pretty awesome. So
It
we're
is.
happy about that.
It is very awesome. So, with the education experience, I totally agree that, the patient is the expert. Now, they're not a medical provider, but they do understand their child or their spouse or their whoever they're being a caregiver for better than anybody else does.
Yeah.
I think with that. But when it comes to the patient education and with what you see, and with those opinion leaders, how how aggressive do patients need to be in getting their health care? And maybe not phrase that the right way. I have had patients that we have worked with, they're angry.
Mhm.
I mean, they are just absolutely fed up with the system. And they're like, doctors make a lot of money. Why don't they know about this? When you have somebody that comes into the rare patient voice and they have been down this journey and they're angry, what is some of the best advice that you can give them about that educational experience that they're about to walk into a new study?
Mhm.
And and here's the problem, there's no guarantee to answers. That's one of the things. You
Sure.
may get some, you're hopeful for some, but you may not too.
Yep, that's absolutely true. So, I mean, the best advice I have is to keep sharing what you know, and so, when you do participate in, whether it be a market research study or a clinical research study, you're getting an opportunity to share your experience, your clinical experience, as well as your emotional experience, because that's a big part of it too. But when people keep silent and don't share, so if you have particular symptoms or you have particular side effects that, you think to yourself, yeah, it's just age, or it's just this, or it's just that, or oh well, it must be growing pains, and she's this age. Those are things that you want to share everything, and I don't want to say get in people's faces, but be organized about it and make sure you have all of your ducks in a row, which most parents that I know in the rare space really do. But make sure that you have all of that information and share it every time, and share it with whomever you can. For us, sharing those things, in a research setting helps to make decisions. So it helps people to make decisions about a particular, whether a company needs to go down a particular path or not. Do they need to develop a device to help assist these patients, with their daily living activities, and all of those things come forth because companies learn about those needs that a patient has. So my best advice, as angry, as you might be for having to go through, kind of the agony of not having a diagnosis, but sharing along the way and making sure, participate in research, share your insights, because that goes back to what we call end clients. So pharma, device manufacturers, government agencies, organizations that can make a difference. And I think that's a really important thing to do.
Well, I think that's excellent advice. Something else that has come across our desks of late and has been a top topic, but how much with the studies that you see in providing that education, how much cultural barriers are you encountering? There are some rural populations that we have become involved with that, whether it's a religious or it's a just a cultural standard itself, that overcoming those barriers with it, you probably have people come through your door and respecting that culture and talking with them about what they can do or how they can participate, and how they can educate, or be educated.
So, when we started out, we were meeting patients by going to events. So we would go to the hemophilia conference in a city wherever that was, or the national, sickle cell conference. Um, and over time, we also have started a really wonderful patient outreach team. So our outreach team connects with people in a different way. So smaller support and advocacy groups, and brings those people on if they're interested as referral partners. And the benefit of that for us is that we're reaching people in places we never would have gone. There's not, they're not usually, big conferences held in rural areas, right? So we are actually we're connecting with patients and caregivers all around the country and around the world in places that we might not actually be able to go to on a regular basis. So that's a phenomenal thing. Our patient advocate or patient outreach team has over 2,000 referral partners right now, and they're spread out all over the country. So some very, very tiny little towns in the middle of Texas or Nebraska, all the way to, people in New York City and Tampa and cities that you might go to for a conference. So um, we are trying to address that issue of access to participate and share your voice by finding, as many people as we can in all kinds of areas and not just through one source. And that's been very valuable to us because a person who is one of our referral partners in, let's say, rural Nebraska, they may have a support group that's local. Now, all those people have the opportunity to join and share their voices too. So that's been a real blessing to us. We started that up just a couple years ago, and it's just grown like gangbusters. And I feel like the reason for that is patients really want to be heard. They just want, they want to help, themselves, their family member, or they want to help other people who are kind of coming up that path, and maybe they don't have to deal with the same things they dealt with over time. So reaching kind of all kinds of communities is really important because those people, as you're saying, in a rural area or a more closed religious community, might really not ever go to a big city or go to a conference or find out that information, and we're trying to find a way to connect with them and make that happen.
Yeah, I grew up in a rural farming community.
Hmm.
I talk and my wife grew up, Eden grew up in more of the Kansas City suburb area, but I grew up on a farm, and I can relate to the knowledge that's there. I mean, our doctor, we had one doctor in town, and he was there on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and that's when you made your appointment. And if he wasn't there, you were driving 25 miles was the closest one, 40 miles was the second one, and 80 miles was the third one, to get to a doctor. If you were really, really sick, the University of Missouri hospital was the closest and best center of resource that we had where I grew up. So I can relate to that. I can understand the rural populations. I can understand the lack of knowledge that's there. And also, it's very unusual. It sounds kind of strange, but in a lot of those areas, they are very close communities.
Hmm.
Um, Everybody knows everybody and has for a long time. You know,
For sure.
with it. Uh, how much have you encountered literacy issues with low literacy? When we're talking about education, and we come from the Midwest, and over the last several years, the Kansas City, Missouri School District for a time lost their accreditation. Literacy rates were bad in that part of the country.
Mhm.
And it was just about not just the basics, the reading, writing, arithmetic were just they were bad. Do you encounter many people coming through for your studies? But they do have smartphones. Everybody has smartphone, and people get online and they browse. But how do you cope with the literacy rates and helping people to find that education source that they need? Because it is a challenge sometimes.
So there's several initiatives that we're connected to that focus on health literacy. So helping to help pharma companies and other market research companies, whoever is touching those patients, to make sure that what they're putting together is usable information. We have several clients who actually take clinical research results and put them into patient friendly language so that patients can use those things, use those research papers to go back to their doctors and say, look, here was a study. If something says, oh, well, this was a standard deviation of so and so, that doesn't always translate to everybody. And so I know that there are a lot of, there's some initiatives that are out there in the research space trying to make things better for patients. Um, for us, when we have patients who come into a study, we have some accessibility tools on our website, which is great. The surveys should be in a level of language that is readable. I have not heard of too many problems with specific surveys, but I don't know that the patients would come back and say I didn't understand this question. So
Yes.
that's possibly could be happening from time to time. For sort of we deal more with a lot of people who have sort of like vision issues and things like that, and so
Mhm.
we're looking at the readability of a particular survey and whether they can see it on their screen, and there's some adjustments that we can suggest for that. And then there's always the screen readers, which for people who have low literacy, the ability to have your computer read you what's on the screen is it's immeasurable. For people with hearing loss, having the captions on the screen, you can't beat that because it has changed things so much. But I think for in situations where a patient is, say, participating in an interview or a survey, or doing a focus group as an example, um, they're answering the questions verbally, and that doesn't usually to that would not usually be an issue
Mhm.
for the types of things that you're talking about. But I think if we do have that kind of situation, we had again a readability, it was a vision issue, but readability issue with a particular patient, and so we work to find a solution for that.
Yeah, we just did a project with a health organization that we worked on documentation of actually a medical equipment for a study.
Hmm.
And one of the initiatives, or one of the parameters we were given to work within, was the readability of the documentation needed to be between a third and fourth grade level,
Hmm.
because that was the patient population they had determined that was the best for it. They didn't want to get too technical with it because it was a device, and there was a lot of things with it. So I can appreciate that. The other thing, I don't know in your studies, but I had recently encountered a gentleman that he was probably late 60s, early 70s with it, but just absolutely hated technology
Hmm.
and having to fill out some documents online. And it was a very step by step process for them with that, and in helping to provide that resource so that they could. So all types of patient populations, and the education. And it'd be very easy, I think, if we're talking about patient education, and if you were looking to do something, you have to remember that not everybody likes technology.
That's
I
for
embrace
sure.
it. I
Hmm.
embrace it every day, but somebody's like, I just miss the good old pen and paper when I could sit down and do a checkbox,
Right.
uh, with that. So there are those things that uh, I think that we have to be careful, and we have to look at, and with it. Um, the the work that you're doing is tremendous in making those connections with patients. I want to encourage everybody. You have a booth at the
Do.
Rare Fair to go out and visit the booth and check out the Rare Patient Voice website and touch base. I am going to open up the floor here for anyone who has questions today. And a lot of our sessions have ran long. We haven't had opportunities to do this, but we do have this today. So I'm going to open it up to the gallery, see if anyone else has any other questions before we go off of this session. So does anyone in the gallery have a question?
Yes, hello. It's Alexandra Fulford here. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, and I
Yes, we can.
Hello, hi.
Hi.
I'm an autoimmune patient, but I also am a social media expert in the pharma industry. So a question I have for you is, do you sometimes find when you're dealing with sort of the companies, they don't always place as much, let's say, gravitas on patient influencers as they would, for example, on KOLs or, you know, leading physicians? I see you nodding your head, sorry.
Yeah, that I mean that's historically that's been, that's the researchers would or pharma clients would go to the doctors and say, "What does the patient think?" Or what does the patient know, what do they know about this or what do they think about this? And kind of at least in the US back in the 90s when there was you could advertise directly to consumers, that's when, there became a little bit of more, there was more credence, I guess, or at least involvement of the patient in some of those, some of that decision making. And we, I would say we even see it today. Probably a lot of studies have a very large, physician component and then, a smaller patient component, but I think it's growing. And I would say, there are for a variety of reasons, a lot of pharma companies, as you probably know, have patient engagement communities or they have a lead who's responsible for patient engagement. They're also the I think just sort of research companies are coming around to saying, wait, we need the patient's input because they think about it differently than a physician does. And I also think patients are realizing their power and their expertise, and they're not willing to just sit beside, on the sidelines and wait for the doctor to say what they might be feeling or thinking. So I think those things kind of together are pushing it forward and making the patient's voice more important. And I think we'll start to see, and we have seen some, evolution of that in pharma companies. I think in time we'll see more of that where you have a patient and a physician kind of aligned and they want to hear what both of them have to say and take that with equal, kind of consider it equally. Thank you.
Yeah, Alexandra. Alexandra, where are you located at?
I'm actually in the UK.
Okay.
Thanks
So
for being here.
and I was going to say, if no one else has a question, I have a second question.
Since you're on, go ahead and ask right now, and then we'll pass the baton.
And this may be also, I don't know, the US may be slightly different than Europe here and probably less of an issue in rare disease, but I know you do other diseases as well. My experience as a patient in the sort of social media sphere versus working with formal patient associations is sometimes there's also a mismatch there. So I don't know, do you sometimes see that in terms of, and maybe also in terms of pharma companies, for example, want to work with a patient association and you have to go, well, that's one thing, but the patient's voice may not always be the same as what's coming from the patient association.
Understood. Yes. So I think, the what and we work with lots of the larger associations and they've been great and wonderful to us in terms of, us going to their events and setting up a booth and helping to, to find new patients. And, they certainly, have a wonderful place in helping patients. I think they also have a lot more like rules and red tape often associated with them. So, where, if I'm a mom who starts a group just, because I want other people to talk to me about, what their experience is with this particular condition, I don't have those rules. Whereas, a larger organization, it's a business, they do have more checks and balances. Well, we can work with this group and we can't work with that. Well, if we work with them, then we have to work with all these others. And so sometimes I think it becomes a little tricky for them. And the smaller kind of, patient, individual patient voices have a much more ability to share their experiences. And or at least with us, we've found they're more free, where we can connect with them more easily in a lot of cases. Not always, sometimes, again, some of the larger groups are happy to connect with us as well. But I think that it really has to do with one being a business, and then, others being sort of a collective of caregivers or patients, or caregivers and patients who, just kind of have a common interest in mind. And so and I think, I know that there was a session yesterday kind of about different groups and even, and how they function, and sometimes their issues, between smaller groups that are trying to work on the same disease. So I think, there's a lot to be solved in just helping everyone to collaborate. And I know everyone has their own, goals and objectives. But, for the sake of the patients, it would be great to see everyone be able to collaborate. And if there is information to be shared, it should be shared with everybody and not guarded by, one organization that paid for the research or something like that. So did I answer your question?
Yeah, yes, yeah, sort of. I suppose
Okay.
that the other sort of end bit was, do you see pharma companies approaching you saying we'd rather speak to the association versus the patients, or is that maybe not so much for what you
We
do?
don't. We see a little bit of both, because some pharma companies have connections with associations
Oh,
already, right? So they may say, well, we're already working with XYZ, organization, so don't go to them. If, we'll work with your other patients, but, or sometimes they'll say, hey, can you go to them because we have a relationship with them? So it varies, but for the most part, we see companies coming to us who are looking for all the I mean, a broad spectrum of the patients, not just those coming from an advocacy group. Sometimes we have clients who are specifically just looking for advocates, and they want to talk to them for some, whatever their goal is with their research. They might want to speak to them for some reason. But I would say it varies from client to client based on the relationships that they may or may not already have.
great. Thank you.
Sure.
Alexandra. Does anyone else have any questions here for us today? Let me check the chat real quick. All right. Well, if no one else has any questions, Pam, it has been an honor to talk with you. It's been great having you as part of the Rare Fair. And thank you for sharing about Rare Patient Voice, and thank you for fielding questions about the experiences that you've had. And thank everyone for coming. Again, if you have an opportunity to go out and check out the Rare Patient Voice booth, please do so in the Expo Center. And we appreciate you all coming. Our next session coming up is we're going to be talking about hybrid events. And we have Emily Ventura, who is the founder and currently the director of the PFIC Foundation, is going to be coming on with me and talking about the reasons that they went with a hybrid event. And then we're going to share a little bit about hybrid events as we're seeing them more and more in 2022. And is it a right fit for your organization? So please, at 2:30, hop on and join us for that conversation. Thank you all for this. Pam, thank you again. for coming.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful to be here.